Good afternoon, everyone. Johnny I here. I'm with Brian Moroska and Caitlin, and today's live. This week is Craft Beer Week. So, in celebration of Craft Beer Week, we're going to be preparing a beer-brined St. Louis ribs. It's a great recipe. It adds a phenomenal amount of flavor. But before we get into the cooking process and the procedure, Brian's going to talk to you a little bit about ribs in general and kind of walk through the best way to get your ribs ready to smoke. Brian?
Thank you for that, Johnny. So first I want to welcome everybody to today's live. Like Johnny said, we are working with pork today. So I got a couple different types of pork ribs here. We have our St. Louis ribs, and then we have a baby back rib. Now there's also what we call a spare rib, which is what the St. Louis cut comes from. So that has the top side on it still, and that's the spare rib. So first off is, what's the difference? Why do you buy one or the other? Well, in competition, it matters where you are. So as you know, Memphis area, they're going to mostly use a baby back rib. So a little bit more lean. They're both great, especially if they're cooked well. Brining them is going to add some more flavor. But the big thing is marbling in both of these. So we said that the baby back's a little bit more lean. So what does that mean is the white striations or that white fat, there won't be as much in the baby back ribs, but in that spare rib or St. Louis cut, there's going to be a lot more of those white striations. Now, if cooked properly, that's going to melt down and make a very juicy product. So today, Johnny actually brined a St. Louis cut rib in a beer brine. So how do we get this ready to do that? So first thing is, I want to just see if there's too much fat on this top side. Too much fat, if it's hard, it's not going to melt in the cooker, and you're just going to have a real, if you take a bite out of that area, it's not going to be as good. So these aren't looking too bad. Now for competition, we're going to want to make sure that they're nice and square. So what do we mean by that? We mean that when we put them down on a cutting board, that they're going to be square all the way through. Now, how do we do that? My first thing is I just kind of take my knife and I find where I need to cut through, and I make this a simple cut. And then I come back and I cut all the way through. Now, a lot of people might say, how the heck are you cutting through bone? Well, it's cartilage up on the top here. So as you can see, a nice sharp knife cuts right through that. So now we're left with a very square rib. Now, depends on your cooking style if you cut off the ends or not. For me, I only cut off the end to square it up. So I'm going to cut the last two bones off. And then this end one here, it got butchered up in the processing plant. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find the edge of that bone, and I'm just going to cut right through. So now we're left with a very square rib. What is that going to do? When judges judge this, looking at it, it's appealing, it's uniform. It also helps with the cooking process, because the more uniform, the more consistent it's going to cook. Now, the last thing to prep before we were to brine it is there's a membrane across the back. Now, this membrane, it holds the ribs together, but if you cook it, it kind of tightens like a rubber band, and it's hard to chew through. So the first thing that I like to do is remove it. There's multiple ways you can do this. You can use a fork. You can use a butter knife. You can just use your fingers and get up under it. Now, a key is to use a paper towel. That paper towel is going to help to grab it, because one thing about that membrane is it is kind of slippery. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to use a butter knife. And I'm just going to slip this right between the bone and that membrane. As you can see, it pulls right back right there. So now I just need to get my thumb underneath it. I can just separate that membrane. Sometimes it comes off in one piece, sometimes it doesn't. No big deal. Just keep pulling it until it comes all the way off. Like I said, the paper towels really will help you be able to pull it. So once you get that all removed, now we're ready for the brining process and the seasoning process, which I'm going to send it back over to Johnny for that.
Thank you, Brian. So, being Craft Beer Week, we started looking at how we can introduce beer into a brine. And a normal brine is water, salt, and sugar. This brine, however, is straight craft beer, salt, and sugar. And I used a brown sugar, kosher salt, and just a great craft beer that I had, in the fridge. You want to basically dissolve. You're gonna put the beer, the salt, and the sugar in a pot and warm it until the salt and the sugar dissolves. Then you're gonna pull it off and let that brine cool. It's extremely important that you let the brine cool. Then you're gonna put your ribs into the brine. You got to make sure that it's completely covered, and you want to let that soak for a minimum of 12 hours. After 12 hours, you get your smoker set up, and what we did was we, pulled it out, gave it a quick rinse to get that surface salt off, and then what we did, these ribs we seasoned with Texas SPG, OBR Texas SPG rub, and then our OBR sweet and smoky rub on top after that, and we did that on both sides. We smoked these ribs at 225 and did the 3-2-1 method. So, Brian, why don't you tell us what the 3-2-1 method is?
For sure. So, after you brine it, season it, and then you're ready to throw it in the smoker, for 3 hours, you're going to cook it straight on a rack. I like to cook my ribs 250 to 275, depending on size. If you're getting a 2.5 pound rack, you're going to be on the shorter side. It's gonna take a little bit longer to cook. Then once you do that, you get a nice color after 3 hours. The bones start pulling back at the end. So down here, you're going to see some bones. The meat's going to shrink and pull up. So at that point, you're ready to wrap it in foil. Basically, once you hit a certain temperature, to get it over that to a done temperature, it helps if you wrap it. So we're going to take a piece of foil and we're going to add some ingredients in it. It might be brown sugar, butter, apple juice. Some people put Coca-Cola in there. It could be all types of things, whatever flavor you want to impart in that rib. We wrap it up, we put it back in the smoker for 2 hours. At that point, the ribs should be somewhere in the 195 to 205 temperature for an internal. At that point, we're ready to pull them out of the wrap, sauce them, and put them back in caramelized. Then we're ready to eat.
All right. So, thank you for that, Brian. I think, what I did with my ribs, when I went to wrap them in aluminum foil, I took some of this tangy barbecue sauce that I had and I basted it, wrapped them up nice and tight, and then put them in the smoker. So I'm going to pull them off now and let's see how they look.
While you're pulling those off, Johnny, I want to talk about, everybody remembers the hurricanes past year, Lake Charles, Louisiana. OBR, several of our volunteers were down there for a long time. They're currently having some flooding situations. and we are monitoring that. And if we're needed, we will go out there and help the residents of Lake Charles again. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. Back over to you, Johnny.
Thank you, Brian. And again, I think, Lake Charles holds a very special place in OBR's heart, and our thoughts and prayers are with the people in that community. So as you can see, what Brian was talking about, you start to see the bones pull away, the meat pull away from the bones. The coloring is fantastic on these ribs. The texture looks great. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to cut them up, and then we're going to put them on a plate, and then it's time to eat.
Johnny, I don't know how you get lucky and keep getting the finished product, so you can try it.
Brian, I do that by design. And this knife is cutting through. These ribs are like butter. And what I'm seeing and what you want to look for in a rib is you want to make sure that it's very, tender, but also juicy. Okay, and as you can see, I'll see if I can hold it up to the camera. You can see that glistening on the rib. Just really a fantastic product when done correctly. Nothing beats a cooked rib.
It looks great, Johnny. Wish I had
the aroma of the beer is what's really grabbing my attention. I'm getting a very hoppy kind of smell and flavor, and it what I can tell you is doing a beer brine, if you really like beer, is a fantastic way of doing these ribs, because it adds such a subtle but deep flavor to the ribs. And I think, as you can see, we just kind of cross-stacked them to make a nice presentation. And now I get to eat. So, Brian, Caitlin, this is for you.
It looks great. Caitlin,
it's fantastic.
Questions? Any comments from any of our viewers?
We just got a lot of support. Everyone's very jealous of the beautiful day you guys are having there in Florida, and everyone's commenting how good these ribs look.
Yeah, the saltiness is perfect, the right amount of sweetness, great smoky flavor, extremely tender and very moist. I think that's all you can ask for in a rib.
Awesome. Oh, we have one quick question. There's a question about brining versus injection. Throw it up on the screen. So what about brining versus injection is the question we've got right now.
Hey, Tony. So I got to be honest. I've always been a fan of brining. I'm going to pass that question over to Brian. I think he has a lot more experience with injection, more so than I do. Brian?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. To me, it's kind of like the old school way is brining. Brining also takes a while. As Johnny said, for this rib, he didn't think it would impart enough flavor in that rib if he didn't submerge it for at least 12 hours. The great thing with injecting, one thing to note, though, is you have to bring back your salt, because if you inject something really salty, your ribs or your pork butt's going to be really salty. It gets that flavor into that protein very quickly. So if you don't have a lot of time, i.e. competition, that's why I have so much, done so much injection, is because we get our meat inspected, our proteins, our pork, our ribs, our chicken, and we don't have a long time to let them sit overnight. Like I said, I cook low and slow. So that inspection is around noon, lunchtime. By 9 o'clock, I have that meat in the cooker, getting ready for turn-ins the next day. So injection is the way that I go in the most of the time, because I need to impart flavor quickly.
Thanks, Brian. Sorry, I was taking photos of my ribs. Not only do they taste great, but they photo really well as well.
doing two things at once. I like it.
I tell you, but I think again, ribs are such a popular item to prepare in the smoker in your backyard. I think deviations on this recipe. There are many different flavors of craft beer that you can use. This was honestly the first time I had brined with straight craft beer, so I thought it was very interesting. And I think my biggest takeaway is you all know how a lot of you know how smoked ribs normally taste when you've prepared them. Introduce a little hoppy flavor to it, and it just takes it to a completely different level. So, I was very happy we chose this recipe, and it was very exciting preparing it, and even more so eating it.
So, Johnny, with that said, everybody, don't forget, if you want to follow this recipe, go ahead and go over to Facebook, and you'll see the link there in the comments or under the live portion of this. Follow it, take pictures of your results, and put them on social media and tag us. We'd love to see what you guys do.
Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.